You are listening to 90.1 KPFT Radio, and this is Vegan World Radio. I'm Michael Battey with my in-studio guests Lisa Robertson and Anu Shah. And our next guest is Dr. Stephen Best. He is a leading animal rights advocate and author of many and diverse books. Dr. Best is an associate professor of philosophy at the University of Texas at El Paso and co-founder of the Institute of Critical Animal Studies. He is the editor with Anthony Nocella of the book Terrorists or Freedom Fighters? Reflections on the Liberation of Animals. And I've recently read his great latest book, The Politics of Total Liberation. Welcome to Vegan World Radio, Steve.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for having me, and happy so-called Earth Day.
Okay. So
every day should be Earth Day. Unfortunately, every day is a corporate domination and destruction day. So, and it's also unfortunate, giving a little bit of reference back to what you were saying in the first half of the show, that Earth Day gets colonized and co-opted and commodified into a great, glorious commercial for corporate sustainability. But I wish it were so.
Yes, that is often very true and very disheartening. But we all have to keep up the fight, and
yes.
Hopefully the earth and its animals will prevail in the end. And so, in that vein, please tell us a bit about the threat you see to human and non-human animals that we're facing right now in this point in history.
The threat to the entire planet is simply one species, Homo sapiens, that has completely overshot its limits on this planet Earth. And I would say that we're a failed species, that we have developed a particular kind of ingenious brain that allows itself to scientifically, technologically, economically manipulate the world. But that has such strong moral failings. It's not able to apparently handle this alleged intelligence, and or to control its growth and its spread, and so that we now live on the planet in a completely unsustainable way. And everything the Earth is telling us is that we are a parasite, a virus, whatever is your favorite metaphor. That we have overshot our limits on this planet. And we are now in contradiction to the nature of life, even though we are offshoots of the nature of life. This problem began at least 10,000 years ago with the origins of agricultural society. I like to look at the relationships between the very earliest organized societies 10,000 years ago, when we started to domesticate plants and animals for our purposes, and modern-day capitalist societies, which clearly are based upon growth and exploitation imperatives. Really, we're living in the same paradigm that developed 10,000 years ago. That is what I call dominator societies. We have formed dominator societies for 10,000 years ago, since 10,000 years ago, and what we are looking at now is the poison fruits of this legacy.
Wow. And I mean, you can say that it's, there's this whole trend now with intersectionalism and bringing together all of these things, saying that it's all a similar cause, right? The dominance and the lack of compassion. So your book talks a lot about how it's important for all these groups, people against racism or sexism or, for the environment or veganism. Why do you think it's important for all of us to work together?
Yeah, really, we're, as the slogan goes, it's one struggle, one fight. We're really all fighting the same thing. We just don't recognize it. What we're fighting is the legacy of dominator cultures, the essence of dominator cultures, the hatred of life, the hierarchical organization of humans over non-humans, over other humans, over the planet, the creation of societies based upon violence, power, and greed. Again, this is an ancient legacy. It's just come to incredible, explosive results in the last few hundred years. So what we're fighting really are the same problems: violence and hierarchy and discrimination, prejudice, and such things, and we really share the same values. All of the progressive movements, whether they're social justice movements, environmental movements, or animal rights, vegan movements, what we all want are peace, justice, nonviolence, sustainability, and the ability to create cultures that sustain life rather than destroy life. We just need to recognize that we're really working toward the same goal. And we, as vegans and animal rights people, need to see that we need the left. We need the social movements to win our cause. And they need to see the social justice movements and the environmental movements. They need to see that they need the vegan movements and animal rights movements to complete themselves, to realize their values, and to succeed in their struggles. We're all fragmented, and it's just the beginning now of trying to come together and realize that we all need one another. This has not been done yet.
Yeah, your book has really inspired me to want to do that. I'm trying to, build relationships with environmental groups and try to, get them to get the vegan message, and also for us to support them. You have to really be reciprocal in these things, if you want to work together as a larger group. So what is your feeling about that? How are the best ways to pull these various groups together?
That's the $25 million question, isn't it? It's something that we're trying to work out in both theory and practice. And I've tried to do this from so many different angles for the last 30 years. And I can tell you it's very difficult. It's very frustrating. It's hard even to fight a single issue fight, whether it's anti-homophobia, anti-racism, anti-sexism, or anti-speciesism. These are incredibly difficult fights all by themselves. But to try to connect these things and put them all together makes it all the more difficult, but all the more essential. We cannot run from the complexity of the crisis that we're involved in, the solutions that are necessary. So I would suggest that we reach out to other groups and that we start to speak about our commonalities, and we work in our communities, and we try to understand their concerns as we share our concerns. We need to have educational forums that have not yet really begun to happen at all between the left, and by the left I mean the broad social progressive community, people that are fighting for progressive change from all fronts, against corporatism, against racism, sexism, and so on. And vegans and animal rights activists, we need to start identifying common concerns and common problems and common solutions to these problems. So really the groundwork for these struggles has yet to been laid. And I'm very complacent, very non-complacent, let me say, about the ability of humans to rise to this challenge. This is enormously complex, and I don't see much progress yet.
Yeah, hopefully we can all contribute a little bit to it. I think it's a good cause, and an interesting challenge too, something good to devote oneself to.
It really is. I listened to your first half hour with the great Kip Anderson, and it was really a stimulating interview. I'd have to say that while we're making a lot of progress on vegan animal rights issues and getting the environmental message across in its relationship to factory farming and the consumption of meat on a global scale, that this is almost too little too late. The crisis is broadening, and whatever gains we're making are being overreached by the domination of the earth by transnational corporate powers. So again, let's not be complacent. Let's not say, yes, we're making incredible progress and we are winning. We're not winning. We're not even close to winning. We're just beginning this fight, and we're way behind, and we have a lot to accomplish. So I just want to inject a little sober note of realism here.
So, Steve, this is Lisa Robertson. I want to say I heard you last year at the Animal Rights Conference, and I thought you really blew it out of the park that first night. And that was really got a lot of inspiration from you. So back to the corporate power. I mean, today we read that Bluebell's recalling all of its products because of listeria, and 5.3 million birds, at least in Iowa, chickens, are going to be slaughtered because of the avian flu. So it'll be interesting to see how the corporate world massages these messages because clearly, as you say, we're on the precipice, and avian flu, as it spreads to more and more of these factory farms, is going to really raise the public's awareness. So what's your opinion? How do we capitalize on this to really use this as a way to highlight to the public this is the face of industrial animal production and this is what it means?
Thanks, Lisa. That's a good question. And this goes really to the heart of total liberation politics. And that is, again, that all of these issues are interconnected. They're interconnected theoretically. They're interconnected historically. They're interconnected psychologically. They're interconnected environmentally in every possible way. The human social justice movement, environmental movements, and vegan and animal rights movements are all interconnected. This is all about one core problem of humans not being able to live on this planet in a peaceful, sustainable way. And so when we look at the news today about avian bird flu or listeria outbreaks, we can see very clearly, to go back to an earlier point I had said, that what the Earth is telling us in so many ways, that we are living non-harmoniously, that we are in contradiction with the ways that, with ecological systems, and these are not as malleable or flexible as we think they might be. We're so used to everything changing and to a lot of change, but ecological systems are rather set in how they are balanced and harmonized. And this goes also to the core message that what we do to animals and what we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. And so when we live out of harmony with other living systems, this is naturally and inevitably going to rebound and affect us and destroy us. And that's why we see that we have avian bird flu. We have a post-antibiotic era in our society, because 80% of the antibiotics that we use in our society go to animal agriculture and factory farming. And so we consume these on a daily basis as a species. And so, of course, we're going to become resistant to these, and we're going to have diseases break out again that we thought we once had controlled. So here we see the rebound effect of our dominator lifestyles.
So that is a very good lead into my next question. How does an ecological perspective differ from the traditional humanist perspective?
Well, the ecological perspective completely decenters the humanist perspective. The humanist perspective is that we are lords and masters of the earth, and that everything exists for our purposes and as our resources. And the ecological perspective says that we are just one strand of a vast web of living and complex relationships, and that we need to understand this, which is an ancient spiritual complex, actually, and also an advanced scientific understanding. We're coming around to understanding what people always knew in their ancient life ways, and now we can establish this factually through science. That we are part of this fast-living system, and we must live in harmony with it. The humanist culture is a hubristic culture that says that we can dominate it, bend it, master it, make it suitable for our purposes, and we cannot do this. So the ecological perspective says that we belong to the earth. The earth does not belong to us.
Right, exactly. I think a lot of humanists, I think many people just say they're humanists, and they're not that deeply into a very specific philosophy about that. But you do hear sort of idealistic humanist types talk about how they want to make things good for all of the people, right? And they leave out the vast majority of all the other life on the earth.
Yeah, that's correct. You can see a kind of advance through social history beginning in the modern era, certainly the 18th, 19th, 20th centuries, where you see the rise of socialism, anarchism, communism, and such social movements that object to the exploitation of the vast majority of human society, of the working masses. And the call for equality on a much more vast and wide scale. And that was very important. Those movements were very important for furthering moral progress, for furthering the struggles for equality and justice. We cannot deny that. But the limitation of those struggles was that they stopped short of millions of other species, of the vast majority of forms of life on this planet. And so I would say that we must now carry this call for equality and peace and justice, non-hierarchy and non-discrimination to all species, to all life, and that the enlightenment that we established in our society in the 18th and 19th centuries has to go one step further to realize that we are all interconnected as systems of life on this planet, and that all forms of life have to be respected. And even if we're only interested in our form of life, we have to radically retool the way that we think, act, and relate to other forms of life and to the vast system of life that we call the Earth.
Yeah, that's really a great standpoint, and I find myself, believing it more and more solidly. But still, to the vast majority of people, it's that is so far from their mind.
That's what we're about, Michael, and this is our educational goal. That we have to create a gestalt shift, paradigm shift in the way that we see our relationship to the earth. So when we're talking about veganism, animal rights, we're not just talking about factory farming. We're not talking about diet, health, or even ethics. Certainly, we're talking about the most enormous questions possible. The revolutionary implications of veganism, animal rights are profound. We're talking about knowing, understanding, relating to, living a whole different way of life on this earth. And if we don't, then we are a very imperiled species, and our future is bleak at best.
Yep. What do you think we can learn from considering a non-human animal standpoint?
That's what I call the animal standpoint that I use in my book, Total Liberation, Revolutionary Politics for the 21st Century. There are many perspectives on life, and we're certainly used to the humanistic perspective and that developed in the Renaissance, that this world is not about that we exist for God, but we exist for ourselves, that we are autonomous beings, and we began to demystify this idea of a divine created universe. And humanism advanced as a revolutionary philosophy, say that humans are the meaning of life, the essence of life, and everything exists for us. And that was liberating in the 15th, 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. But it's a very dysfunctional worldview right now, because it became just another articulation of a dominator worldview, whether it was the medieval worldview or the ancient or even early agricultural worldview. It's just another dominator worldview. So we have to move beyond that and to recognize that we need new worldviews, new identities, and new cosmologies.
Yeah, so if you could see the world from a pig's point of view or a cow's point of view, you would see a whole different reality, a whole different way of seeing the world. And go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm sorry. So when I say the animal standpoint, I literally mean that we look at the world as if we were a pig or a frog or a hog, horse or pig, etc. We look at the world from the perspective of how we interrelate to animals, how we have treated animals, what animals have meant to us positively, going back to ancient worldviews and animistic philosophies, and how important animals were for us to frame our identities and to relate to the earth and understand the earth and our position in it. And an animal standpoint looks at how we have dominated animals, how we have colonized them, domesticated them, and the consequences that animal husbandry, the whole legacy of animal exploitation, going back again 10,000 years ago, what that has meant for us as a society, and as stunted moral beings, and what that has meant for us ecologically. We can only understand our social and ecological crisis today and how it has developed historically from the animal standpoint. We can only understand the crisis that we inhabit in the world today by looking at our relationships to animals and how we have treated animals. And that tells us so much about our world that we didn't know before. For instance, when Marx in the 19th century re-examined society from a class perspective, showing how society developed according to class conflict and exploitation of labor power throughout history. That was revolutionary. That was really important for understanding the dynamics of history, whatever the flaws of Marx's theory were. It's undeniable. That was crucial. So, but it was certainly limited because it was a humanist perspective.
Yeah.
And so if we can look at history from the animal standpoint, we can gain just as many incisive insights, just as many revolutionary insights, and that's what I'm calling for.
So you're very critical, obviously, of the modern concept of progress. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it is a modern concept. The idea of progress did not exist in the ancient world. In the ancient world, in the Greek world, medieval world, it was either the notion that history is just cyclical. It's just the ebb and flow of civilizations, the rise and fall of kingdoms, or a very pessimistic view that God had created us to sin and to die, and some of us would go into salvation and so on. But in the kernel of that Christian idea was the idea that the notion that there was a linear rise of history, that history had a beginning, a middle, and an end, rather than just being cyclical. And in the modern world, really, we secularized that concept, and we discussed how history developed, it advanced, it followed a certain trajectory and chart, and it got better. That's what we meant by progress. It got better according to real advances in science, technology, and in world markets, if you will, that we had developed the world economically in ways that were completely unprecedented. So things were changing rapidly. A lot of people thought they were getting better, certainly scientifically and technologically, and medically, in many ways they were. But we developed this notion of progress in terms of the extent to which we could dominate the world and master the world and bend it to our purposes. And it turned out this was a completely dysfunctional concept. It's a quantitative concept. It's based upon capitalist economics. It's based upon the degree to which we can command and master nature for our purposes. And it left out all qualitative dimensions. It left out the impact of this modern civilization on the vast numbers of peoples of the world, on environmental systems, and on the animals. And so now we need actually not to destroy the concept of progress. I still think it's important to measure whether we're improving in our lives and our societies and our struggles or not. We need to reconfigure this concept to include animals and to include the earth, so that we cannot say we are making progress in our world to any extent unless we are beginning to harmonize with other systems of life on this planet, unless we are beginning to dramatically reduce our impact on the planet, to eliminate to the extent possible violence against other humans and other animals and the destruction of the earth. This is now the new marker of advance of civilization. This is now the new concept of progress I try to work out in the book.
Yes, my last question here was going to be, what changes do you think are needed to stop or at least mitigate the impending global ecological catastrophe? You've already answered that to a certain extent. Do you have anything to add to that?
Just utterly revolutionary changes. Let's not be satisfied with reforms. Let's not be satisfied with tinkering. Let's not be satisfied with rehabilitating the dominator paradigm. We need to understand just how dysfunctional the worldview and systems of life that we have built over the last 10,000 years, how dysfunctional these systems are. We need to understand just how advanced and serious this crisis is. And again, even though we think we're advancing, the crisis is advancing much more rapidly. We can see this with climate change, with overpopulation, with migration, and the suffering of peoples, the impoverishment of peoples, and certainly the increasing toll on animals. The animal death toll just keeps climbing. It's not reducing. It's climbing. It's climbing globally. The industrial factory farm meat production system is advancing. It's spreading globally. We haven't really nicked that yet. We haven't eclipsed that yet, so we have so much work cut out So it's absolutely revolutionary. We have to make socially revolutionary changes, psychologically revolutionary changes. We have to change our societies. We have to change our minds. We have to. There's so much change ahead of us. It's hard to imagine how hard this challenge is and what we're facing. But we can't underestimate it. Otherwise, we'll miss it entirely. So we have to have a really sober and frank assessment of the extent to which environmental crisis is overtaking us globally, and the degree to which we really have to revolutionize our societies and our lifeways and our ways of thinking and living. And I don't think, for instance, that capitalism is a sustainable form of existence. We cannot have a society that's based upon profit and accumulation of resources and the consumption of resources and exploitation of the earth. There's no sustainable way to have that kind of system. So I really believe that we need a post-capitalist society, a post-anthropocentric society, a post-dominator society. The work is all ahead of us.
Yeah, it's really a huge challenge for sure. To what extent do you think that sort of personal actions, personal decisions like, stop using animal products or just try to decrease their footprint, how far do you think that will go, and how far do you think more social actions are necessary?
It's all vital. All the personal changes we can make are vital. Veganism is absolutely vital and critical to a sustainable society. There is no sustainable future without veganism. The United Nations and the most advanced scientific reports have told us this, and this is now becoming scientific fact. So veganism and animal rights are necessary conditions of a sustainable, peaceful, viable planet. But they're not sufficient conditions, and that's what we have to recognize. So we have to fight for peace and democracy and justice on all possible levels. And we can't fight for animal rights or veganism in fascist societies, in societies that lack democratic cultures, as our democratic cultures are shrinking everywhere. And militarism is replacing democracy. So we have to fight for some really basic principles as we advance our own. And so here again we see the interconnectedness, the importance of holistically relating these struggles and identifying common values and common ground. Again, I insist that we have common ground with the environmental movements and the social progressive movements. We have the same values. We just need to recognize this. We really want the same kind of worlds, and damn it, the social justice movements have to recognize that any peaceful world, any world based on justice and sustainability cannot include the exploitation of animals and the consumption of animals.
That was very well said. I've also been reading some of the works of Gene Sharp about nonviolent action, and I think it has a lot to teach us as well, But that's a much harder struggle for many of us, than changing our personal behavior. I know you mentioned and you've talked about, groups like the ALF and the ELF and some of the successes that they have had. How do you think these nonviolent action and things that the ALF does, how do you think that will contribute?
Well, it will contribute a lot in terms of liberating animals that cannot be liberated by so-called peaceful means, by demonstrating, by petitions, protesting, etc. There are times, and many of them, when we have to break into laboratories and we have to break into puppy farms and vivisection prisons and take these animals out by any means necessary. But this is to say that there are many tactics that are necessary throughout history and for any particular social problem that we need to use. So I want to say first that we need to be pluralistic. We need to look at all of our options. We need to be contextualistic. We need to see which options will work best in which situations. And the whole debate between so-called nonviolent or violent forms of struggle, mainstream versus animal liberation approaches, this is really not where the debate should be. The debate should be, what do we need to do to change our social institutions? So even if we had 1 million ALF forests throughout the world, they're going to liberate a lot more animals that stand in prison today or that could be liberated by other means. That's for sure. But it would still not solve the problem. The problem is an institutional, economic, psychological problem, and that's what we need a total revolution to solve and to address.
Well, a very good way to wrap up this interview. Dr. Stephen Best, you've been a great guest, and you've really given us a great message for the so-called Earth Day, as you would say. So it's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Okay, good night.
Good night.
And that is Vegan World Radio. Thank you very much, and good night.